Well, I think we'll go ahead and get started and we'll hope that Christine's going to join us, but we want to be really mindful of your time, Sean, and our guests as well. As I was mentioning a little bit earlier, we've got are we recording now, Sammy? I just want to make sure we're on the record. Perfect. So what I was mentioning is we actually had our lowest signups for any talk, and we didn't realize when we put this out that it was the July 1st week. And then, of course, this being market gardeners, anybody who is market gardening is probably going to be gardening, and it's really hot out, so people watering and that kind of thing that also are happening. So we do appreciate the people that have joined us today, and also to note that we do record all of these sessions so they become something you can always watch on our YouTube channels. And in the middle of winter, when you're thinking back to the warm days of summer, you'll be able to come back and think about and watch the videos and get prepared for the upcoming season. So our June theme is managing the workload, and at this point in the season, many growers are deep in the reality of making the farm work. Planting, weeding, harvesting, and even like on the human resources, marketing, staffing, customer communication, depending on what you're doing for a market garden. And all the small decisions that you have to um, fill the day before all that other work is even really done. So at this time of year, this is where we start seeing systems either helping or start showing their weak points. And maybe Sean, you'll be able to share some of those successes and failures that maybe you're seeing. And a workflow that looked good in winter during that planning season. Um, may feel very different once crops are coming in and time management is really something that you struggle with. And so, and then weeds growing and pest and disease creeping in. And then, you know what? Like actually having a summer life, like at the end of the day, we're not only farmers, like we're in a place where we only have nice weather for about 3 or 4 months out of the year. And so every activity that could possibly be scheduled is also scheduled in the same time that we're doing our farming. So today's conversation is really about looking honestly at where that time is going, what is creating pressure, and what systems are helping growers stay on top of the season. And we also want to look at the workload through that organic lens. And so soil-based and organic systems often create different labor needs, different workload flows than you might find in conventional farming. And so today we are joined by Sean Smith from Crooked Farms. And we've talked a little bit with Sean over the last couple of months, learning about his small batch compost tea brewery and the micro market garden. And I don't know if you have some pictures that you might be able to share with us of the locations or not, but if you do, that would be great. And if not, we'll save it for next time.
We're gonna save them for next time.
All right. Okay. And you were an academic prior to launching Crooked Farms, and in media philosophy.
Hmm.
Yeah. So definitely brings a whole different perspective in terms of farming to the whole thing. And Christine Hamill is not here joining us today. And my hope is that she figures out her way and realizes either she's missing it or if her signal's not good, she's able to join us. And so she runs Persephone Market Garden, and hopefully she'll be able to join us partway through our conversation today. But before we launch into it, I just want to acknowledge the land that we are coming from today. So I recognize that many of you are coming from different places throughout Ontario or even Canada, and so your land acknowledgement may be based on the people that we have there. But what we would like to do is acknowledge all of these people across Ontario and Canada that have, for time immemorial, taken care and been stewards of this land for us. So our First Nation, our Inuit, our Métis, and all of those people. Sammy, are you able to share a screen for me? That would be helpful. I did the land acknowledgement from my mind. You've got really bad internet today, am I right?
Yeah, I'll
Okay.
do my best, but
Yeah, all right. If not, I can also um do it from my end here. All right. And
can can you see it?
yep, there we are. All
Hallelujah.
right, perfect. Thanks. And then the second piece is just talking about who we are here at Ontario Organic. So for years, we were known as the Organic Council of Ontario, and we've gone through an incredible transformation. And we found that our new name, Ontario Organic, really represents the work that we're doing on the ground for all of those that are in the organic industry through Ontario. And that's from the people that have their fingers in the dirt, just like Sean, all the way to the people that are selling products on their shelves, processing food, and the people that are eating organic food as well. That's all part of our organic value chain. And so we're so thankful to all of them. And so, yeah, we're just your little nonprofit here working every day to make organics even better here in Ontario. And so, as we launch into today's talk, I've got some great questions. And any sign from uh, Christine there?
No, I'm gonna
No.
call again.
Okay. All right. So, Sean, you are the star today.
Oh no, oh no.
Do you want to talk a little bit about where you're located, your scale? And I know you've got a couple of different locations, so talk a little bit about what you're doing each of those. And yeah, let me get started with that.
Yeah, as we talked about last session, I'm in Toronto, so it's an urban agriculture context. As we know, with urban agriculture, everything is very small. So I began as in a backyard context, actually, making small batch composts and brewing compost tea out of that. And because, we're talking about microbes, which are, the science of the very small, I was actually able for years to work on that footprint in my backyard, kind of making high quality microbial composts there. As I branched more into vegetable growing in a market garden sense, I've joined a 9 acre farm out at Downsview Park in the northwest corner of the city. We're called the Many Hands Urban Farm Collective, and it's six market garden partners form the nonprofit corporation, and we hold a lease. A 10-year lease with two 5-year renewal periods by our choice. So essentially a 20-year lease with Canada Lands Corporation. So this is pretty exciting for us because land access in the city is everywhere is a
Very
challenge.
hard. Yeah.
Land access in the city is particularly a challenge. And 9 acres, which compared to some more conventional or larger scale organic producers, is kind of a drop in the bucket. But for us, it's a big deal to be able to get 9 acres of growing space right in the heart of the city, 220-foot greenhouses, a wash and pack station, all this kind of stuff, real infrastructure. And so we're a real working farm, but really with six different farm businesses that steward the space. And because we're all kind of value-added producers, we're able to kind of manage the economic challenges of land in the city in a way that perhaps a more commodity-based farmer, that's racing to the bottom line, might not be able to do in that same context.
Yeah.
So it's been a shift over, I'm in my eighth season now, a shift in kind of the science of the very small with a backyard footprint that has expanded. And my personal space is about a quarter acre. And in that quarter acre at Many Hands at Downsview Park, I have a number of different kind of micro spaces that I learn about different types of growing because ultimately my main product is compost tea. I sell it to home gardeners, but I also sell it to professionals who are urban farmers. I sell it to greenbelt farmers. I sell it to arborists. I sell it to horticulture pros. And so for me to have various different types of growing spaces at Down Zoo, allows me a chance to see how these other professionals work by doing the work myself. Also, it allows me to continue my former career, which was being a teacher, in a different kind of context. So I have a more conventional orchard space there now. I've got more of a permaculture food forest space, something that we could call a natural farming space, where I try and practice least human intervention possible and still grow. There is more of a conventional market garden space, a space where I grow in wood pallets to simulate what we could do on empty condo development lots around Toronto, and then a composting education space. So six kind of very discrete
Very different.
spaces,
Yeah,
yeah, that
yeah,
that allow me different lenses into um, growing food, growing compost, growing microbes, but also demonstrating how compost tea can be used in all these different contexts.
yeah. And one of the things that I just realized we keep bringing this up here, and I'm you know what? When people see tea, they think of what they're drinking, and maybe they think of organic tea. Do you mind walking us through what compost tea actually is so that people have a better idea of what that actually means?
Yeah, absolutely. Typically when people buy compost, they think they're buying a kind of fertilizer. In actual fact, compost has almost no NPK in it whatsoever. If you look at a compost bag, it'll say zero point 0.1, zero point 0.1, zero point 0.1 as your NPK numbers. What compost really is, it is a source of organic matter, which is of course important for building soil health, and it's a source of microbiology. And depending on the kind of compost you have, it is going to be the quality of the microbiology that's in that compost. When you make it in a small scale sense with a certain kind of approach, you're going to have a healthier microbiological spectrum in that compost. And compost tea is really about trying to extract the microbiology from more of a solid based compost and get it into a liquid form. And in many ways, it's kind of like making, you would often put your compost in like a large scale paint strainer bag or something like that. So it resembles a tea bag, which is why it's often called compost tea. Um, and the idea is you sort of separate the microbiology from the coarser solids that are still there and get them out into a liquid solution. From there, you can aerate the solution to add some oxygen to it. You can put some other amendments in that will help feed the microbiology. So, a simple sugar like molasses will help feed bacteria that's in that liquid. A more complex carbohydrate, like say powdered kelp, will help feed fungi that are in that sample. And essentially, you're trying to get a super brew of microorganisms that you can then apply to depleted soils. And when we're in the urban context, pretty much every garden is depleted
Is
soil,
depleted, yeah.
And when we're talking gardeners who use potting mix, like bag potting mixes, many of which have been sterilized before they go into the bag. There's no microbiology whatsoever. And so we become reliant on synthetic chemicals, fertilizers, uh, pesticides, etc., to help a plant grow rather than growing a living soil in which the plant and the microbes are going to form a kind of symbiosis that has always existed for billions of years.
Yeah, I was just at the nursery this weekend buying some house plants for my son for his new house, and I was like, "Do you have any like organic fertilizers?" And then I was like, "Or just like dirt?" And then I realized I was like, "I'm just gonna dig up the dirt from my yard." I'm like, "What am I even doing here?" But you do, that's the first thing you go into is, oh, what can I buy? And then you're like, oh, actually, I have really great soil at home. I'm just going to transplant it and add back to it. So it's a good point that that soil is bare and soil that you buy from stores is not great soil either. So All right. Well, thanks so much for that background and also just walking us through what compost tea is. I want to, I don't think we've had that conversation before today. So
Mhm.
I was like, yeah, we should definitely cover that. So let's move into the workload conversation.
Mhm.
Right now, where are you losing the most time?
Well, because of how I mentioned those different micro spaces at my many hand space at Downsview Farm. And going into this season, I knew this was kind of an expansion year for me. I only really started growing market garden vegetables to complement the compost tea side of business last year. Um, as with many farmers, you always hear this mantra of diversifying revenue streams, making your farm more resilient by having different kinds of activities you're doing, different kinds of farming you're doing. And so I knew this last year that I was due for that kind of a move. Vegetables seemed the next logical step for me. And so this year was kind of growing on the beginnings that I started last year, the roots, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I knew that that would require a lot of just infrastructural work, building permanent beds, planting an orchard. Mostly a lot of this work was done myself, and so I'm a single person with finite hours who's also the at-home parent who does school drop-offs and pickups, and my farm is located on the opposite side of the town from me.
Oh,
So there's a lot of constraints there. Um, and so when you say, what's the biggest challenge right now, or where's the workload facing that biggest challenge, it's knowing that this was kind of an expansion year for me, and that it was going to require a lot of upfront investment of time to hopefully pay off in the future. For example, once you plant a number of trees in an orchard, that work is done, and then the maintenance work becomes a different kind of thing altogether. But hopefully, for me, the more I can create perennial type agriculture, perennial type orchard work, that kind of stuff that's going to come back again and again, that doesn't require the same amount of intensity as sort of annual crop market gardening. That way, I can kind of blend it all together.
yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, that it is hard, like to be so far away, have so many different things you're doing, and just now starting to invest on fruit and veggie side as well. Are there certain tasks in all of that that you find are taking longer to do than you had originally thought they would?
Uh, y- yeah, I mean there's a lot, right? I mean, um, I think the biggest one that, and every market gardener is familiar with this, is that the plants don't stop growing because you have other time concerns. And whether it's your seedlings that are in the nursery or whether it's weeds or whether it's whatever, you can defer certain actions as a farmer, but you're not deferring plants. The plants are going to do their thing. And so that kind of keeping up with weeding, keeping up with maybe just keeping a space clean so that these newly planted trees have a chance to really, take root well. Um, or maintaining your seedlings and getting to them before they die out. All of these things are life carrying on whether you're ready for it or not.
Yeah.
And I think it's an adjustment if you haven't had as much experience with that. So I'm in that aspect of farming very low experience. And so it's a learning by doing. I didn't grow up on that kind of a farm. I didn't grow up on any kind of a farm, but I certainly didn't grow up at any time working in that farm context. So you're trying to learn a skill that you probably would have been better suited to apprentice at younger in life, and you're trying to jump into it later in life without that apprenticeship. It's a big learning curve, and I think the number one learning curve is that the plants are going to keep going whether you're ready to or not.
Yeah, and are you finding like I've noticed in my gardens that this rain has resulted in I feel like more weeds and more of that ground cover stuff than I've had in previous years. Are you seeing that out in the farms as well?
Definitely. I mean, Toronto has, for a number of years now, had a real, spring heavy rain phase, and then followed by a pretty significant drought phase through
Dry.
July and
Yeah,
August.
dry,
Yeah.
right. Yeah.
And I know different pockets of Ontario are similar to that. And I don't want to speak for them because I don't know it as well, but, it's certainly pronounced in the city because we have this heat island effect, with all the roads and highways and blacktop creating that heat island. But then the presence of Lake Ontario right next to it, is cooling in a way, but also destabilizing in terms of kind of, how climate would go otherwise. And and so this, for me at least, it seems that this heavy rain and then drought cycle has become very pronounced over the last few years. With the different spaces I have to treat them all kind of very differently. When I'm growing in the wood pallets that have 5 or 6 inches of soil depth, it's like growing on a rooftop farm, and things dry out very quickly. And so I need to make sure that that's irrigated in a way that, I don't necessarily have to with some other things in the field because I plant in mounds that are meant to hold water. Um, and this is part of my learning curve as well, is to show people and show myself, how different soil depth, different mulching techniques, all these things manage water, or hold water, and how we can start getting better at managing these Julys and Augusts that are very drought heavy, drought intensive, without constant irrigation. Because the thing about constant irrigation is we presume we're always going to have a source of water to go to. And while I'm glad we still have that at the time, I don't think that's in a climate change world. I don't know if that's something we can always just take for granted. And so the more we're learning about, the royal we of learning, but also kind of in the context of crooked farms at many hands, how to get the most out of the least water, or put differently, how to create soils. And this comes back to compost tea again, how to create our soils in such a way that they are resilient on their own. This to me is, I think, an increasingly big deal.
Yeah, and when we go back to talking about organic principles, like that is really the most important thing is resiliency, right? Like
Yeah.
building in soil that can withstand drought, can withstand lots of rain, and can maintain itself through all of the extremes that we do see in a normal season here, but also that we will continue to see in bigger and bigger extremes. So that is a really important thing. We've been talking with our grain farmers and they've just been struggling with having the right conditions to get their seeds in, right? They need a wet soil and then
Hmm.
a number of day of dry soils, right? Like it's like and it has been an unusual spring for them for sure in terms of getting seeds into the ground. How about you? Is everything you say you have that large greenhouse space? So is everything started in that greenhouse space? Or are you doing it? Have you done any seed direct to soil and found that you've been impacted by that?
There is some direct to seed, or sorry, direct sowing. And it is impacted in the same way, but I think, it's important to draw that distinction when you're kind of planting seedlings in a nursery context versus what the grain farmers are doing. I mean, those folks are brilliant in terms of what they do, in the sense of having to really watch weather and time things in a way, that, is pretty profound, where when you get to grow seedlings in a bit more of an artificial, for the lack of a better term, but more of an artificial environment, you it really gives you, I think, a bit more of a buffer in terms of, success or failure, in terms of things going in it, and in an urban context even more so. You know, I'm fortunate in the sense of having a network of folks who, I can give an example. The other day, the Backyard Urban Farming Company is a company in Toronto that helps people grow sort of urban agriculture spaces, in their backyards. as part of their work, they grow and sell a ton of seedlings, vegetable seedlings for their customers out of a greenhouse in Etobicoke. And at the end of the season, they have a surplus inventory, and they just all of a sudden turn over, 13 trays of seedlings to me.
Wow.
Yeah, and
Yeah.
it's part of, and it's part of that reciprocal gift economy. I think that's important that we all talk about in terms of regenerative farming not being simply about the farming, but about regenerating economies, regenerating sociabilities, communities. This is a kind of thing where it's like, hey, this is really cool. I've got 13 trays of seedlings now. Instead of having to plant from seed this next succession, I've got plants now that are this big. And, you know, and it also just happened to come at a time that I was getting super behind on some other stuff. This kind of stuff happens, and I think in some ways, yes, it's a little bit more artificial than what happens with the grain farmers, where you have to time your seed with weather just perfectly. Um, but it also, the artificial part of it is also, I think modified a bit by these networks of community that allow seeds and seedlings to kind of move around a little bit. My scale is also a big part of that as well, right? Like I can get away with certain things at a quarter acre that the 100 acre or the 1,000 acre farmer could never get away with.
Yeah.
So, I don't want to speak as if this is some kind of generic solution. It's
No.
it's a it when we talk about farm context, it's something that works for me in my context.
Yeah, and that's always good to point out. And even if they're big, even if they're large farms and they're equally the same size, there's so many variables that really can affect in a farm operation and how things are taking place there. And so like kind of just building on the interesting location and where you're at right now. What are all these things that you're the most busy with right now? What's besides driving between your house on the east side and the west side, which obviously is a big deal. School's done, so maybe that part of your workload is a little
Well,
less.
I was
Yeah.
going to mention that actually. I'm glad you mentioned it. You talked about this being Canada Day week and and how that changes a certain rhythm for the farm perhaps. School being out is a big one. And when we talk about time and we often think about time as like this fixed container of I've got X number of hours in a day. And that's important, but I think there's two other aspects of time that are really important to talk about here when it comes to farming. One is timeliness, and I think your anecdote about the grain farmers is a really good example of timeliness. Certain things have to happen at a particular moment. And whether you have 2 hours available or 20 hours available, that's not so relevant as much as kind of what needs to happen now. And timeliness is a real challenge, I think, with market gardening because, all of us are doing so many different things, and there's so many moving parts that timeliness is a real challenge, and particularly lately with the way the weather has changed from like a really really cool, there was a wet period, a super cool period after it had gotten warm there a bit, and so how do we respond to this timeliness? And now it's gotten hot again. But the other one, coming back to your point about kids being out of school, is rhythm. Time is rhythm. And we all get into, our daily rhythms. We all get into our weekly rhythms. There's seasonal rhythms. I can say I've definitely got a rhythm that is my compost tea season, which is very different than my market garden vegetable season. And so all of these rhythms, I think in many ways the farmer is a manager of rhythms, or at least you're negotiating and navigating these rhythms. Kids being out of school adds that a real disruption to those rhythms, because now their rhythms of a school day are kind of taken out. And in urban agriculture, I don't live on my farm the way many rural farmers would. So where you could have the kids in the house and back out to the field and in the house and back into the field, I have to drive 40 minutes across town. And that's if there's no traffic. And so I don't have that e easy affordance where, yeah, I can bring the kids to the farm for a couple of hours, but I certainly can't bring them there for 8 hours. It's just it's not reasonable. It's not fair to anybody. So, the idea of a family farm in my context is very different.
Yeah. And so then other than the driving, what do you feel like you're doing the most now with your in terms of your workload?
I think, transitioning from cool spring crops to hot crops. There was a lot of there's a lot of orchard work earlier in the summer. Sorry, earlier in the spring. Then there was the cooler spring crops, transitioning to hot crops now and trying to manage that. While all these other pieces, the compost tea piece didn't stop. It's on a monthly rhythm with my subscribers. I've got orders coming in all the time, and so you're managing that rhythm at the same time as these. So it's really, I think, trying to get my last things into the field for now, and then establish kind of like that midsummer routine, which is very different than the March, April, May, June routine.
Yeah. And are you harvesting anything right now?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of food coming off the field or the wood pallets or the wherever, my many different spaces patchwork together. I do have some subscribers who will get a weekly box. Um, and then, as more stuff is coming out, that will turn
Yeah.
into more food later on in the summer that I'll sell in a
Yeah.
different, excuse me for one sec. That I'll
Bless you.
sell in a, thank you. In a few different contexts. Typically, I would have a weekly box. I will sell some at a farm stand at my home, and then any surplus that comes after that goes to a community fridge down the street.
Okay. And so what are you harvesting right now? What's coming off your various spaces?
Oh, there's been rhubarb, there's been cold greens, lettuces. What else? Geez, some peas have come off. Um, I've got my first tomatoes that are going to be ready very, very soon, so I'm excited about that because I was able to get some early ones in and into pots. So they're kind of out in the wood pallet context where it's a bit more artificial. Um, what else have I been pulling out? Your greens, your kales and chards and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So a pretty good diversity. When I'm offering a box, I have to offer diversity just like everybody else does. So, um, but I also try and make sure there's some perennial stuff in there, which takes some of the workload off me, especially early in the spring when everything's so frenetic.
Yeah.
So, I will have some rhubarb, obviously. I'll have some herbs, some perennial herbs that are going in a box every week and things like that. And that really helps, flesh out some of the value offering, and at the same time without, too much additional work, particularly like I said, early in the year when you're trying to get your later summer stuff done as well.
Yeah. Yeah. What do you find is physically most demanding for you right now?
Old age. I should have started this much, much, much younger. Physically demanding. It's because of the nature of the projects I do. I don't use a lot of mechanical, um, implements or machinery. So where other farmers at many hands will use BCSs a lot in their work, for example, if I'm doing an experimental project in wood pallet farming, I don't have that same affordance. Now, at the same time, I don't necessarily have the same tillage needs because, I'm in 6 inches of wood pallet depth. Um, so my practice is a lot more about amending that soil than it is about tilling that soil. I have other projects that are deliberately no-till. So that means no BCS, but it means hauling a lot of wood chip and compost. So that in terms of that physical, what's physically happening right now, I would say that labor of setting up these projects, hauling a lot of wood chip, hauling a lot of mulch, is probably the biggest right now. I suspect that it's the kind of thing that as the infrastructure is put in place, it becomes less onerous for me next year.
Yeah. And what about in terms of mental um demands? What do you find is most mentally demanding right now?
That's a really good question. I think when I talked about rhythms earlier, um, there's no computer program that handles your rhythms. People might have calendar apps and stuff like that, or they've got their local line where all their orders are going to be spat out. But I don't think there's an app that manages rhythms. And when you're trying to manage all those rhythms as the lead farmer, you're doing it all up in your head. And I think that's a mental taxing. I find it really exciting about this work, but at the same time, I think it suits a particular individual who can, you know, I'm drawing it with my hands. I don't know how to put it any other way. It's like you have to be able to do this and to thrive in that. But at the same time, it can be mentally taxing, and you get to points of burnout. And when you're in that May, June, early July season, there's no time to take a day off and recharge. Maybe later, when things are in the ground and they're solidly established, and it's like, okay, I can take a day off here, or I can. You mentioned at the outset of the podcast, we have short summers, we have families, we have lives, we want to go camping, or we want to do these things. But there are certain times of the year you just cannot do it. And that I think is the mental taxation is like knowing you just can't get that time for yourself right now, um, because you're juggling all these rhythms. And particularly if you're juggling as a market gardener 40 different vegetables that each have their own demands, or if you're a person doing compost tea, which has its own business line, and vegetables, which has its own business line, and you do tours as well, which has its own business line, they're all very different types of operations, and you've got to juggle them somehow.
Yeah, and let's talk about the somehow. So, what are the systems that you are using to juggle all the things and at this point?
Yeah, that's a good question. Part of it is, I have a lifelong
Or are
experience.
you? Are you doing it? Are
Yeah.
you even juggling?
No, I mean, partly I have a lifelong experience of kind of being that scattered mo brain that tries to kind of hold everything in tension up here. So I have extensive experience with that. But, pragmatically, your content management system like local line is fulfilling it for me, and leaning into how to use it for my um for my own purposes, because again, in some ways it was like trying to fit a square peg into a round hole as a compost tea business, kind of coming into this something that for traditional farmers. However, it's like I found a way to make it work for me. And that, I think, with any kind of tool or application is the key. How do you make that tool work for you rather than you working for it? Um,
You want to elaborate a little bit on that system that you have? Because maybe everybody doesn't understand how those systems work.
sure. I mean, it's kind of an inventory management system, primarily I think meant for market garden vegetable growers. But certainly there are meat producers and dairy producers, lots of different types of farms that use it. But it's an inventory management system, and it's a purchasing, ordering system, that helps you, develop your pick lists and stuff like that each week, and manage orders basically. But, as with any software program, it has many more features than you personally need. And I think we can say this about any kind of software. It's always going to have more features than what you personally need or what your farm needs. And so, like we've talked about farm context already, it's really about figuring out your farm context in a digital space. We as farmers might understand our farm context very well in analog space, like the actual farm itself, and the weather and where we're located geographically and where our customers are located, blah, blah, blah. But I think it's, become more important over time to figure out what our farm looks like contextually in a digital space.
Yeah.
Uh, you know what I'm saying there? So local line is kind of, And everybody's got their own way of managing inventory and taking orders. That's the service I use. And I have to say, I mean, they're a growing company as well. They're in Ontario, so I'm happy to support them as they grow. Um, Cole, the owner has been super responsive over time, trying to meet the needs of farmers. So, I'm personally really happy to support them. Um, but that's a piece of it, right? I mean, it's not the whole piece. And, because you've got to have a website. You have to have, if you're going to run events, you have to have some kind of event management. And it's a big part of what I do because that's how I get people to come to the farm. That's how I get my labor. It's like I will do workshops. And having a workshop, I have people that might work for half an hour or 45 minutes. And when you're a solo farmer, solo entrepreneur, having little bits of people coming in for an hour is a big deal for me. It's just a humongous contribution to my farm.
Okay. And I think it's actually, I just shared the link in the chat there, and it's localline.co. And it's good to know that it says .co. I guess it is .co. All right, that's a different one. And it's nice to know that's a Canadian-based system. Are you finding that other market gardeners are using other software that they really like?
Yeah, I don't know them all. I think there's one called Harvey. Um, I don't know them all. I know, yes, I do know there's a handful of them out there. And coming back to my point about farms finding themselves as a digital farm, or what that means in a digital space. There's been a lot of competition to kind of, enter that space so that, maybe you're not trying to shoehorn yourself into Shopify or something like that, that you've got a web app that's designed by farmers for farmers. Like that really matters, I think. Um, and so, yeah, there's a lot of competition in that space right now. You could, in terms of kind of like farm planning software, there's a lot of competition for that. I mean, I'm not at the scale where I really require that, but certainly once you get past my scale, every market gardener needs to farm plan a little bit more robustly than I do. And
That
so
was my
there,
next question, was to ask you what farm planning software you use, and
yeah,
if you were
I
like sticking to that at all. So I guess not nothing. Spreadsheets? Do you use
yeah,
like
exactly.
Word?
A little bit of spreadsheet stuff. I will say that I'm increasingly using AI to help with certain tasks, and I know this is controversial in a way, and in terms of how society feels about AI. Um, but my take on it a bit is that there are forces out there that are trying to use AI to transform agriculture into a very kind of robotic enterprise. And I think small scale farmers need to have those tools to use as small scale farmers, to like an ecological or organic or regenerative farmer needs that tool as well to be able to farm organically, regeneratively, ecologically. And it will look very different. It might not look like automation. It might look like something very different. But for me, again, as a small scale person who is a solo operator, solo entrepreneur, um, what I'm able to accomplish with robust usage of AI is very much for me like if I were able to use a BCS to work the soil. I can dig by hand forever, or I can use the BCS. And if it's done ecologically, or you're tilling in a very conservation sense, it can be a productive tool, despite the idea that tillage could have some problems for the environment, right? We say that tillage isn't great for the soil, it's not great for the environment. In certain cases, it's necessary if we do it responsibly. I would say the same thing. There's a way to use AI that helps me manage my time. It helps me do things that I wouldn't be able to do otherwise as a sole proprietor.
Yeah, and I think that's a good thing, right? Like that we have the discussions, we think about, sort of the good, the bad, the ugly. Like there's a lot of depth to those conversations. Taking the organic lens and looking at what you're doing, and I know you've talked about regenerative, no-till. If if you had to say where it adds complexity, where would you say you're adding the most complexity to your workload with those with that lens?
I, I mean, I think there's two places. Number one is I really try and source my own inputs, or even make my own inputs. And again, I'm at a scale where I can do that. We at the farm, the 9 acre farm context, we have a lot of thistle. It drives the other farmers crazy. But for me, I see and I should say this is kind of pedagogy that's come to me via an Ontario organic grant, an Ontario education grant years ago. So, this is kind of coming full circle, this conversation. But I see dynamic accumulator plant that's pulling up, nutrients from deep in the soil profile. And so I harvest those thistles and I ferment them in a kind of Korean natural farming or a Jadam natural farming style. And because I'm coming at it from a compost microbiology lens, it's a very short jump to get to microbiology for fermentation, and from there to saying, hey, these thistles don't have to be a problem; they can be a solution. Now, that being said, there's a pedagogical piece that comes with that in terms of my learning curve, but also a pedagogical piece that comes with that where I can have a workshop and say, hey, let's harvest thistles. How sexy is harvesting thistles? Um, let's
You gotta
harvest
have good
thistles.
gloves, good
Yeah, get
gloves.
good gloves. We're going to harvest thistles today, but we can make our own fertilizer here. And it adds a little bit of time, but for me, it fills into my sort of philosophical mandate or brand of the farm, if you want to call it that. So it can, it's both. You say like, how does this add complexity? It would be much easier to just go to the store and buy a product. But, part of the mandate for when I started Crooked Farms in the first place had to do with resilience in an era of climate change. It had to do with self-sufficiency in food growing, and a lot of these kind of related pieces. And so, like I said, we can't presume water for irrigation always going forward. I don't think we can presume going down to the store and purchasing fertilizer either.
Yeah, and that's really, really some great points there. All right, so we have about 7 minutes left here, and I know we don't have a big group here today, but Peter, Giselle, if anybody here wants to ask some questions, this is a great opportunity to do that. And if not, I actually have some questions, some more. I have one additional question, which I think I know the answer to, that I want to ask you before we close out here. And Sammy's actually put up our poll there, so if you could take some time and fill that out and give us some feedback. Only way we know that we're on the right track or the wrong track is if you tell us. So
Hmm.
let us know. So, all right, do we have any questions there? Either you can come off mute or just drop them into the chat box here. And as I wait for that to come in, I will ask you this question. If you could change anything for this year to help either with your workload or selling product or anything really in terms of your farming, what would that magical thing be that you would change?
I mean, there's a fictional answer. The fictional answer is when we're farming, every mistake we make, we've got to wait a year to remedy that mistake. That's part of the nature of the seasonality. And it would be super nice to be able to fix mistakes in 3 months or 2 months. But that's not real. So I understand that. I think if there was something else that I could really I think it's accelerating your learning curve. I don't know how to put it any other way than that. I think this is one of the ways that the internet really works well for farming is the amount, not to say that I have expertise here, but the amount of expertise I'm able to go out and gather, via YouTube, via Facebook groups, via peer sharing. It's a certain kind of agroecology. Like agroecology was, you know, always meant to be about not simply the way you cared ecologically for the soil, but a peer-to-peer knowledge sharing relationship between farmers. And I think that part is something that's really facilitated well. Um, and in many ways, it becomes like the Matrix, where, Neo kind of plugs into the back of his head and is like, I know karate now. Um, we are able to drink a lot of this information in now to be able to digest it and still you got to wait a year for your mistakes to come full circle again. That'd be the thing that I wish I could change. How do I really digest all this information? Because there's so much of it now. How do I digest it, make sense of it, make it actionable, knowing that whatever mistakes I make, I'm still going to have a year to fix them. And I don't know necessarily what an answer to that looks like. What I can say is that I'm fortunate in the sense of being at many hands, where there are different businesses working together,
With many
and
hands.
yeah, many hands, many jazz hands, um, to have that peer mentorship available right on site. That's great, and it's site specific, it's site contextual, and so I would say you know, anybody who can farm, if you can farm in collaboration with other farmers, find ways to do that. That I think is the best one.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I think that's a really great way to round this conversation out, Sean. So fantastic to have you talking today about the workload. And we're going to have you and hopefully Christine, she totally forgot about this, joining us next week, or next week, next month, about what's actually selling. And I think she also does like a CSA type of farming as well. So I'm not sure, this will be more talking about your guys' farm stands and that kind of thing. But Sean, if you don't mind bringing in some photos next time, so I would love to see what these pallet farming looks like. I'd love to see what Mini Hands Farm looks like, and I'm sure the people joining us would also love to have a peek at that Downs View and other locations. So hopefully, we can do that next month. And tomorrow is our quarterly Grow Smart grants, loans, and learning for organic farmers. And this is usually our biggest, one of our biggest attended sessions that we have. So hopefully we can see you guys out there tomorrow, and we continue those quarterly. We also have our grain series and our retail market series will be happening this next month, as well as our special, the butter breakdown, coming from St. Bridget's. Guillermo Anderson will be joining us July 16th. So lots of upcoming events right here on your computer on our webinars. And Sean, yeah, we're eventually going to have a podcast. And you said when you started this out at the podcast, I'm like, oh, but we don't have the podcast yet. We just don't have enough time to get all the things done, but that will be coming up in the future. We'll be able to translate some of these over to podcasts. But we also have some other things that are going on. And so we have our Feed on Farms tour that's going to be happening over the summer as well. We have a house cat brunch coming up. We have a wagging ride at Fennings. And yeah, so put those all on the calendar as well. And then what's our next slide here, Sammy? Just make sure we get it all there. So, yeah, so the last thing to mention is that we're here doing all of the things that we're doing because we have all of our memberships. And so there is a membership for you. We have our advocate memberships. So if you are not farming, if you're not in the organic value chain before the eaters, which makes you in the value chain, but if you're one of the advocates, we do have those memberships available. And organic producer, Sean, that would be where you'd fall in. Our industry, organic business, that's for our stores and processors, retailers, and of course, like our not-for-profits and universities. There's allied associations for that too. So, and then also just to always mention that we have our impact partners, and so those partners donate either a percentage of their sales or a funding, fund different projects, all sorts of options with our impact partners. And so we're very lucky to have a number of those organic impact partners that help keep the lights on. All of this help keeps the virtual lights on, as it were, at Ontario Organic, as we all actually work from home and we're stationed in Guelph. And Sammy's also dropped in the chat there a link to all of our events. So sign up for the events. You can register them. And then Sean, we look forward to having you back next month with Christine. But you filled the space really well today, and there was a lot of interesting. I like the philosophy. You could hear the philosophy, the cycles, and all of that permeating through there too. So I really enjoyed hearing that side of thinking about gardening. I don't think we think about that as much, but it's a really important consideration for anyone that's diving into this or has been doing it for years and years. So thanks so much for joining us today. Thanks so much to all of you who've joined today, and we look forward to seeing you at one of our other events. So have a great, fantastic rest of your week.